So we're in a summer series. It's called Legit Faith, and that really describes the New Testament writing of James. At the core of James, he says this: I will show you my faith by what I do. That's how you legitimize your faith, is you show it by how you live it out. And so we're into our fourth message today, and there's a big transition. There's a huge transition coming today from everything that James has been talking about, and then transitioning in verse 13 to something brand new. And in order to introduce that, I need to test something, if you don't mind. So just let me test this with you. So listen to this, right? So did that do anything to you? Are you feeling a little bit of an irresistible thing? Well, listen to this. I saw you reach. I saw you. Yeah. Okay, one more. Just listen to it. Resistance is futile, right? You're gonna look. Right now, you've got the self-control not to look, because I'm gonna call you out. But in about 30 seconds, you're gonna go. Just to look, right? Is there anyone here ready to admit that you have an addiction sitting in your pocket right now, right? And there's a reason for that. Every successful app is designed to hook you. There is a process in app design that's called captology. In fact, at the best universities in America in computer design, software design, this is taught. It's called captology. It's the art of capturing people's attention and making it hard for them to escape. So there's a professor and designer at Stanford that's written significantly about this. In fact, he's written a book called Hooked: How to Build a Habit-Forming Product. And so designers think deeply about an effective app. And so he says that a successful app creates a behavioral loop. And so the app must trigger a need and then provide the momentary solution to it. Trigger a need, provide a momentary solution to it. And so feelings of boredom, he writes, or loneliness, or frustration, or confusion, or indecisiveness often instigates a slight pain or irritation inside of us. And so that prompts an instantaneous or mindless action to quench the sensation. Therefore the ding, therefore the chime, therefore the, I don't know what you call the other sound. And so, but gradually, what they know is that these attachments harden into a habitual loop where users turn to the sound or the ding of the app when they feel one of these tiny little sensations coming on. That is so interesting to me. But as I read that earlier this week, I just kept thinking, wait a minute, I've read this before. Somewhere I've read this before. It had another application, but I think I've read it before. And then I turned to James 1, beginning in verse 12. Really, it's 13 where it starts. And now I remember. Oh, yeah, it's from a writing from 48 AD, written from the New Testament writer James, he talks about this exact process and its spiritual effect on me. So let's jump in and look at it. You see verse 12 there. There is verse 12. I'm going to jump to verse 13. So let no one say when he is tempted that I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Verse 15, here's the loop. And when lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Verse 16, do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good thing given, every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. Verse 18, in the exercise of his will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, so that we would be a kind of first fruits among his creatures. He's describing the very same captology loop, except in the spiritual realm of our lives. And so this is the word of God. It speaks supernaturally. We open our hearts for it to have that effect in us. And so there's this big idea that's flowing out of these verses, and it's four statements. A big idea really should just be one statement, but it's four, okay? It's four statements. So follow these four statements. Here's what the passage is saying. Every trial has a temptation to stumble in it. Every trial has a temptation in it to stumble. And there is a way to overcome it. Blaming is not that way. Blaming takes away your power. We're going to discover that over the next couple of moments. So look, we live in a moment in the world's culture around us where the world's culture and influence is strong. It's strong around us. There are big influences in our present culture that really want for nothing to ever be labeled as sinful or wrong. And so even in the church in our generation, I've seen it, I feel it. There's this hesitancy, there's this suspicion, there's this discomfort that sort of just sweeps or flows across a room when anyone rises up and says, sin is serious. But at the core of New Testament Christianity is our journey as Christ followers to battle sin and to defeat temptation. And so it turns out that it actually becomes necessary to have to discover why that's important. Why it is important to go to battle with sin. And so actually in this message, strangely enough, but that doesn't surprise you about me, right? Strangely enough, I have to pause and do an insert. We're going to put an insert into this message. Because in order for you to feel the importance and feel the urgency of what James is saying, we actually have to insert some more fundamental information in it. And that is this. It's urgently important as a Christ follower that you do battle with sin every single day in your life. And so the question is, why? Why is that? Let me give you just some beginning reasons. These are not all of the reasons, but here's some beginning reasons. Here's why we should battle sin personally inside our own life. Here's why, number one, because the Bible says that there is a principle of evil inside of each one of us. Romans 7:21, Paul says about himself, he says, look, I'm the one who wants to do good. But look at what he says about himself. But I find then the principle that evil is present in me. The one who wants to do good. Here's the reality. All of the ancients have told us this. If you don't do battle with the sinful instincts that are in you, you'll be shocked at the darkness that will ultimately come out of you. That's why. Let me give you a second. Here's the Here's the message of the entire Bible about sin. It harms you. That's why we should do battle with it. God's commands in the Word are for your flourishing, to keep you from suffering, or to at least limit its effects in your life. And look, all sin, no matter what it is harmful to you in some way. And so just like a mature, loving parent, God's love says, just like the love of a mature, loving parent, God's love says to you and me as his child, I want to protect you from things that will harm you. And so therefore, I'm calling on you to do these things, and then do not do these things, because I love you and I want to protect you from harm. But there's another, and that is sin blocks God's blessing. Sin blocks God's blessing. Now look, there is a flawed way to say this, an incorrect way, a way that'll lead you to all the wrong conclusions, and there's a right way, there's a correct way to understand this concept that here's why you need to do battle with sin, because sin blocks God's blessing. Listen to the right way. When we persist in sin, it just inhibits all that God wants to do in our life. There are things that he wants to do in us, things he wants to do with us, things that he wants to give us, but he can't, because he can't do it in a rebellious heart. And so sin has an effect. It just makes you spiritually weak, where you're just going through the motions, where there's no reality of God in it, nothing obvious that he's doing in your life. It just becomes kind of banal and flat and tasteless, like sawdust in your mouth. Sin makes you spiritually weak. It makes you apathetic. And so you got to do battle with it. And so James already knowing that, sort of assuming that each one of us have that in our brain, he goes on to say, look, I want to help you learn to defeat temptation, the captology loop. I want to help you with that. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to not give you a to-do list. I'm going to give you insight into the captology process that goes on inside of you, because it's more fundamental than a to-do list. And so he gives us insights into why temptation does what it does to us. And so he starts the insights this way. Number one, in verse 13, he's going to tell us, look, here's the first thing you need to know. Temptation cannot come from God. It can't come from God. Verse 13, let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. And so this sort of sets up kind of a conflict. It sets up sort of a paradox. Here is the first 12 verses, and it's like really clear that God allows trial into your life. He allows trials into your life. In fact, the Bible says many times that God sends those trials in order to test us. And so there's this sort of wordplay. It's not really wordplay. It's just a reality about a word. So he has said the word trial all the way through the first 12 verses. Suddenly in verse 13, there's this conversion. He stops talking about trials, and he suddenly starts talking about temptation. The word for trial, the word for temptation, in the biblical language here, they turn out to be exactly the same word. Now, how do you understand that? Here's how you understand it. That word is broad, and that word, the way you know how to translate that word is whatever context it is in. And so what he's telling us here is that, look, God can test us, and he does. Genesis 22:1, and God tested Abraham. Listen to Deuteronomy 8, verse 2. You shall remember, Moses is saying to the people of God, you shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, testing you to know what was in your heart. That wasn't for God to know what was in your heart. It is for you to know what is in your heart. It tests so that you will know what is in your heart, whether you will keep his commandment or not. And then it skips to verse 16. In the wilderness, he fed you manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you, and that he might test you. Why does God allow trial into your life? Why? The next phrase tells us to do good for you in the end. So it's important for James to say temptation cannot come from God. This temptation to stumble, to fall, to give in, to give it up, never comes from God. God's activity in any trial is this, to do good to you in the end. And he's saying this is important. This is important for you to carry, for you to faith whenever you come into any trial. Here's why it would be so easy. This trial has come. It's hard. I want to give up. Look what God's caused in my life. Look what he's done. I don't want anything to do with him. I'm getting a little too animated for myself here. So, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I embarrassed myself enough without your help, okay? And so, yeah. So I'm dialing it down here. God says, I humbled you. Why does he keep saying, I humbled you? To make you aware of your insufficiency and my total sufficiency. That's why he does that, to do good for you in the end. But he will never be the source for tempting us to abandon him. He'll never be the source of temptation for us to give up or give in. And here's why. James is telling us why. Because he cannot be tempted by evil. In fact, the word in the New Testament language is closer to, he is unable to be tempted by evil. His moral perfection is so perfect, it is so completely perfect, he is unable to be tempted by evil. It's not a possibility. It's just simply not possible. And so what's going on here? He's telling us something encouraging, and then he's telling us something challenging. Listen for those two. The encouraging thing, it helps you. It helps you to know this, that God cannot be tempted by evil, and so therefore he does not tempt anyone with evil. It helps you to know this because it helps you to know in the midst of the trial, God's not being erratic. He's not moody. He didn't say, I'm mad at you, you get this trial. He's not like that. He's not untrustworthy. Here's what you can know about God in any hard thing. If he's working in it, it is to do good for you in the end. You have to faith that, though. You have to faith it. When the trial is there, because what we say the big idea is there is a temptation embedded in every trial to stumble, but God's not the source of that. And so you've got to faith the opposite. And the opposite is that whatever God's involvement or activity is in this trial, it is to do good for me in the end. I faith that and I trust that and I look for that before the reality even comes. It's a powerful reality. And if you get that right about God, you can defeat the temptation in any trial. And so it's encouraging for that reason, but it's also challenging. And it's challenging for really the core of this message, and that is that it removes something that makes you weak. This is big. It's challenging because that statement removes something that makes you weak, and that is looking for someone to blame for the effect that temptation has on you. Well, you know, if God would not have sent this to me, I wouldn't have messed up like that. Do you see? I like, there was a subject in high school that I liked really hated it. It was algebra. I hated algebra. I hated algebra 2 even more. And so, but I was stupid and took it, right? So that's my own fault, right? But here's the deal. I could never blame the test for flunking. I didn't flunk algebra. I need you to know that. You know, I'm too prideful for you to walk away thinking. So I can't blame the test. I can only blame what was going on inside of me. I didn't study. I did whatever. And so it challenges because it takes away something that weakens us. And that is, look, blaming is a weakening exercise. And that's what James is trying to get us to. It weakens you desperately. Blaming steals power from your soul. And so if you believe hard circumstances or other people make you do things, then you're giving away a power that is going to make you so weak. And so James is battling that for you. And he wants you to go to battle with that I cannot blame this temptation I have inside of me to give up or give in or to abandon or to walk away. I can't blame that on God because God can't be tempted, and he does not tempt anyone. God's only activity in any trial is purifying, it's strengthening, it's maturing. But he adds a second insight to that. Not just that temptation cannot come from God, but secondly, he gives us the one reason you are tempted. He gives us the reason. He says the one reason you are tempted lies within you. That's a huge insight. That's going to cause you some great victory if you can embrace that. The one reason you are tempted lies within you. Verse 14, but each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lusts. And then when lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. And so James is ready to tell us the source of our temptation. He's ready to tell us the reason that we are tempted. You ready for it? Here's what he says it is. Epithemia. He says it's epithemia. That clears it up for you, right? Epithemia clears up. There's why I am. That is the word that has been translated into this translation, lust. But we automatically think of sexual sin when we hear the word lust. But epithemia is actually something much broader, and it's not just that limits the word too much, because epithemia means just strong internal desire. And that is the core of you. That is the core of you. Here's the reason we're tempted. I'm going to say it in a little bit of a kind of a radical way, exaggerated way. So, hey, that's on purpose. It's for effect. Don't email me and object to what I've just said, okay? All right? Here's the reason we're tempted. James is saying it's not the devil. It's not the devil. That blaming does what to you? Say it back. It weakens you. The devil does tempt us. Scratch the email because I just said it, all right? But he's not the reason you are tempted. The world tempts us, but it's not the reason you are tempted. People in our lives tempt us, but they're not the reason that we're tempted. I illustrate this over and over. I need to get a new illustration, right? Some of you want me to get a new illustration. But for about 10 years, my pathway home, there was a certain light that I had to turn left at to get home, and it is the longest light in the history of all traffic. I have grown old there. I'm on Social Security now because of that light. I've sat there so long, and so right beside that light. There's a bank. There's a bank right on that corner. There's a bank right there. I've sat there for, it feels like hours upon hours, and there's that bank. I cannot recall that I have ever had the thought, ooh, I want to rob that bank. That might be what the devil was doing. He might have been throwing that at, man, rob the bank. But it had no effect on me. Why? Because it wasn't already embedded in my desire. The reason you are tempted is your own desire. There's the point that James is making. And so here we go again. I do this with you all the time. Our heart is the center of our being, not our intellect. We want it to be our intellect. I make that point over and over. The core that drives us is not our intellect, the thinking part of us, but our heart, the desiring part of us is what drives our lives. And here's the deal. I think that anything that you are pursuing in your life right now that is important to your life right now is driven by a thirst, by a desire. You will ultimately do, I say this to you all the time, give me these, you're struggling with a decision, it's one thing or another, tell me what those are, then let me ask, which one of those do you actually want? And when you tell me that answer, I can predict which one you're going to do, because you will always do the thing you want. You are driven by desire. Okay, let's get somebody else who can say it better than me. So there's a theologian, spiritual formation person. His name is James K.A. Smith. Listen to what he's written. So look, we become what we worship, because what we worship is what we love. And as we've seen, he writes, it's not a question of whether you worship, but what you worship. You're a worshiper, which is why John Calvin refers to the human heart as an idol factory. We can't not worship because we can't not love something as ultimate. And so we are tempted from something that lies deep within us, this core thing, this thing that we call desire. And it's our desires that tell us what we love. And we will always worship what we love, and we can't not love and desire something as ultimate. And so here's what's important. This metaphor that James is using, right? You heard enticement, and you heard desire, and you heard conception, and you heard birth. It's kind of the metaphor is sort of sexual, right? But he's not pointing necessarily at sexual sin. It's the picture that he's painting here, and that is this: your desire has an effect on you. It seduces you. And so, sin is doing things that God says is wrong. Yes, that's the surface of sin. But if you want to deal with the root of sin, temptation in you, here it is. Sin in you is to desire anything as ultimate other than God. And so, when you desire for your career to be the ultimate source of satisfaction, security, significance, you've replaced God as that ultimate source. When you look at a relationship, a romantic relationship or serial romantic relationships as your source of being known and being loved, as your ultimate source of being known and being loved, you've replaced God in your life. When you look to a substance, maybe it's even prescribed, or alcohol, or a drug, or marijuana, or whatever it is, to be the source for you getting peace or relief in your life, you've replaced God in your life. Whatever you look to be ultimate security, ultimate safety, ultimate significance, ultimate meaning, to be ultimate being known and loved, you've identified the gods in your life. And the Bible here is telling us that our desires are disordered, they're broken. And that's sin in us. It is that we always look for the substitute rather than the real thing. Rather than the Creator who made us. Rather than the one who can heal everything fragmented in us. Where we look to Him to be our ultimate significance. and security and our safety and our meaning and our purpose. And the one who knows us and loves us and embraces us. And so he says, look at verse 15. He does the progression. It's desire, conception, birth, sin, and then death. And he's just saying, look, that's where you go. You're going to these substitutes. And this desire inside of you longs for one of those things in order to substitute for God. If you deal with that first, you will find great power in your battle with temptation. But he gives a third thing, and we got to get there. The third thing, and that is the most powerful way to defeat it. The most powerful way to defeat it. And so look, he's telling us the temptation, right? Temptation cannot come from God. He's telling us the reason you're tempted lies within you. Look, the most powerful way, thirdly, the most powerful way to defeat it. And so James is going to tell us how to defeat it. But he says sort of strangely, unexpectedly, here's how. Verse 16, don't be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good thing given, every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there's no variation, no shifting shadow. In the exercise of his will, he brought us forth by the word of truth so that we would be a kind of first fruits among his creatures. And you're going, I need the list. I need the to-do list for how to defeat temptation in my life. You were expecting James to say something about getting out of temptation. You expected him to say, flee, run away, like Paul said in 1st and 2nd Timothy. You're expecting him to say, get accountability, like Paul says, to submit ourselves one to another. You're expecting him to say, look, reduce your exposure to that sin. Don't have it like any fellowship. You're expecting him to say that. And you know what? Some of those things are okay in a pinch. Sometimes they help, but they're not foolproof. They help some. You may even think he's trying, that he should be saying to us, look, believe that sin hurts you. Well, that helps. But does that deal with the fact that it feels really good in the moment? Before then it bites you and devours you later. And so what is James doing here? And so look at the remedy. Look at James' remedy, verse 16. He says, look, don't be deceived. The starting point is this. Don't get fooled into thinking that something other than God can feed your disordered desire. There it is. And guess what? That process of getting there, becoming convinced of that, it's not fast, easy, and quick, and a fix, like in one moment. It actually takes time. It's this process of sort of tearing out some old stuff. It is about changing desire and habit by replacing it with a desire for God, replacing it with a desire and a confidence that he is my ultimate answer. And he will never crush me. He will only embrace me. And so his answer is, look, every perfect gift, every good thing and perfect gift comes down from above. Do you see how that defeats every good gift for significance or safety or security in your life? Don't look horizontally. Don't look for a career. Don't look for a person. Don't look for a substance. Don't look for a sensation. Don't look for a vacation. Look up. That's the only place that good and perfect things come from. And so there's so much more. There's just so much more to say here, but I've got to draw it down right here. Look. In the ancient world, carpenters didn't have steel nails. And so basically what they had as a nail would be a wooden peg. And so they'd bore a hole and drive the wooden peg in, and that would hold two things together. And that wooden peg would then, with moisture, swell a little bit and hold tight. But then they had a problem. How could you ever pull that out? How could you ever pull a wooden peg out? They had an answer for that. That you drive out a nail, this peg, with a nail. You drive out the old corroded one with a new and better one. And so you replace desire with desire. You replace a horizontal, broken, disordered desire with a thirst and a desire for what God can do in your life. And so in our hearts, you drive out disordered desires with a desire for Christ, a desire for His life to flow in you, a desire to be known by Him and loved by Him and accepted by Him, a desire to find all your security in Him, all of your significance in Him, a desire to find all your meaning and love and acceptance and joy in Him. Now, there's so much more that needs to be said, but we got to draw a line there and turn our hearts toward worshiping Him at the Lord's table. I'm going to ask us to bow together for a moment.